Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be looking at the relationship between circumference and diameter. In particular, we're going to look at a formula that links them together. Now normally we would ask you to bring in a circular object, use a piece of string to wrap it around the object and then measure the length of that string, which helps you to work out the circumference. But for the sake of a video, we've just got the measurements here for you. Now these circumferences on the circles that I'm about to show you have been measured for you very accurately. So the 6.28319 represents the length of this circumference here. And then there's a few more circles on the right hand side that we're going to look at just throughout this video, but we're going to focus on one at a time. And then the 2 is the length of the diameter. So the question is asking us to work out how many times bigger is the circumference compared to the diameter. So in other words, the diameter multiplied by what will give you the circumference. And we can treat this as a division, and we're going to use a calculator to work this out because this is measured very accurately. So let's try the first one. We're going to do circumference divided by diameter equals, so that's going to be 6.28319. 6.28319 divided by 2, and that gives us 3.14159. I'm going to round it very slightly for some of these, but you get the general idea. So for the second circle, we've got 25.13274 divided by 8. And you can see we actually end up with the same number. So the circumference divided by the diameter of this circle is 3.141595. For the third circle, have a go first before I do it. Okay, so let's put the numbers in. 12.56637 divided by 4 is 3.14159. So we get the same number. And in the last circle, let's put the numbers in here. So 8.23656 divided by 2.62178, and surprise, we get the same number again. So C over D for the last one is 3.1415908. So at the end, it very slight difference at the end, but the big idea here is that no matter which circle you use, which circle you measure, when you have the circumference and you divide it by the circle's diameter, you will always get 3.14159, and that kind of goes on. And you probably know about this number, you probably heard of it, but we get this special number which I'm going to talk about in this video. And then this is actually a relationship that exists for all circles in the universe. And that's really important that you know that. So let's name this thing. So we know that the circumference is always 3.14159 times the diameter. So just if you think about it, if this is the diameter here, we can wrap the diameter around a circle 3 times and a little bit. So that little bit is the 0.14. So it's 3 times and then 0.14 of the diameter can be wrapped around the circle. This animation on the left is actually quite nice because it kind of color codes the diameter as it's being wrapped around. So that distance, it's measuring it out. So this does have a name. It's called pi. We normally write it like this with a little flick on the right one. The font on the computer just changes it sometimes to look like that. It's fine either way, however you write it, but pi looks like this. It's a Greek letter and it has a value of 3.14159, which is what we got for all of our circles. And then our answers were very slightly off because we had to round our answers but this is the actual exact value, and you can see there's a dot 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 because that value goes on forever. So, and there's no pattern to it. So pi is an irrational constant, which means you cannot write it as a standard fraction. Now the closest fraction you can write it as is 22/7, but that's not exact. It is very close, but generally we can't write it as an exact fraction. And again, this is just another way of looking at, if you were to unroll the circumference, it would be 3 lots of the diameter plus a little bit, 0.14. So this formula is the main thing that you need to know for this video. The circumference of a circle is given by the formula that we've discovered, which is circumference equals pi times diameter. Now, you've got two formulas here. They are actually the same formula. We know that the diameter is simply 2 lots of the radius, or 2 radii together. So instead of d, we can write pi times 2 lots of r, or 2r. Now we can simplify that by writing pi times 2r, but we want the number to be at the front, so we conventionally just write this as 2 pi r. And that's your second formula here. So all we're doing is replacing the d, the blue d there, with the blue 2r. So it's the same formula, you need to know both. So if you know this radius, you can just double it. You've got the diameter, and then you can use this formula. If you know the diameter, there's no real reason to change to the other formula, but you can just write it the other way if you want to. So we're going to practice using this formula and how to write it out. It's very straightforward. So it's written on the right hand side of your screen for you. So what we have here is calculate the circumference of the circle. You have been given the diameter of this circle. We can see the diameter is 7. So if we use our formula pi d, pi times d, which is equal to pi times 7, the numbers always go in front in maths. So we can just simplify it as 7 pi centimeters. Now this feels a bit unusual to write it like that, because you're usually used to just writing a number. But that symbol there, all it means is 7 multiplied by pi. And you're allowed to leave it like this, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Now, if you put this in a calculator, you're going to have to press 7 times, and then shift. And what you see here is the number 7 is where your pi is. So let me press that again, shift 7. That's 7 times pi. Now, on some of the older calculators, the pi button is on the middle bottom key, so it's shift and then the middle bottom key that you press. Now, if you press equals, doesn't really help you because it's just written it as 7 pi, which is exactly what you put in the calculator, but we want to turn this into a decimal, so we're going to go to format, down, okay, so decimal. So as a decimal, it's 21.9911 rounded. And you can see that's on the calculator, and then I've written that here. And roughly, if you were to round it, so you can see that roughly equals to 22 centimeters. So these three answers have very specific names or ways of being you being asked to represent them this way. 7 pi is called an exact answer because it hasn't been rounded. 22.0 is the rounded answer because actually the decimals do go on beyond the 0.0. We've rounded this. So both of these answers are equally important, and you're expected to write both answers for all questions. Except for non-calculator questions where sometimes you just leave it as an exact answer. So this topic could very well be a non-calculator topic, in which case you're not going to be expected to do 7 times 3.14159 without a calculator. You're never going to be expected to do that. So the exact answer should always be written, the rounded answer should always be written for calculator papers. So another way to call this exact answer is it's in terms of pi. So these are phrases you need to look out for in an exam question. If it says, what's the circumference in terms of pi? Well, you can just stop there. What's the circumference to 1 decimal place, or 2 decimal places, or 2 significant figures, or rounded, and then it might be something like that. Okay, so fill in the blanks, pause the video and try all of these questions here, and then I'm going to go through these. Okay, so first of all, we've got the diameter given to us, so pi times d, so that's pi times 10. So that's going to be 10 pi centimeters. Now it's asked to give your answer in terms of pi, so we don't actually need to round it into a decimal, but if it did ask us to do that, we'd do 10 times shift 7 equals format decimal 31.4, and we know what pi is already, 3.14, so this is just going to be roughly 31.4, and I'm just going to change that to a 2 centimeters. The rest I'm not going to do exact the rounded answers because it's just asked us in terms of pi. So second question, we got pi 2. Now because we've got the radius, we're going to do 2 times pi times r. So remember, there's 2 formulas. They are the same formulas, very, very easy to remember. So this is going to be 2 times pi times, now the radius here is 3. We don't really need a calculator for this. It's just 2 times 3, which is 6 pi. Don't forget units. This is a length, so 6 pi centimeters. And then the last one, the diameter is 5n. So pi times d becomes pi times 5n. So that's going to be 5n pi centimeters. Okay, so time for you to practice. Have a look at these questions here. Work out the answers. Pause the video, and then I'm going to show you some answers. Okay, so here come the answers in 3, 2, 1. So these are the answers. Check your working out. We've got the exact ones, and we've got the rounded answers here. Okay.